I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name.
Nagai.
Thank you.
No worries.
I think we're live though.
Hi, everybody. We are live doing the YouTube, so hopefully some of you will join and ask some questions. Today, we're welcoming back Kate Nguy, who many of you will remember from episode 82, What Are the Seasons of the Sacred Womb? Kate's journey into women's health began during her own fertility struggles when she was offered surgery as a quick fix for her cycle issues. Instead of accepting that answer, she chose to understand her body. That decision led her to her deep into hormone science, menstrual cycle awareness, and nervous system healing. After navigating motherhood, burnout during COVID, and a profound personal loss, Kate rebuilt her relationship with her hormones and discovered that burnout isn't a flaw, it's biology out of sync. Today, she's a certified hormone health practitioner, cycle syncing strategist, integrative yoga therapist, and host of the What the Hormones podcast, helping women reconnect with their cycles and reclaim their power. We're so happy to have her back on with us. So, welcome, Kate. We're super excited for you to be on with us
We
today.
sure are.
I am so excited to be back.
So, yeah, so we thought we would maybe talk about hormones and stress and all that good kind of stuff. So, if you want
hmm
to lead us off talking about that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, for so many women, we don't realize the deepness that stress or cortisol impacts our hormonal makeup. We just assume like our hormones are out of balance or that, we're in perimenopause or it's postpartum. Like we give it all these labels. But at the core of it, the two main drivers that really control our hormone levels or our hormone balance is our cortisol and our insulin. And so cortisol is a major driver for even our insulin levels in our body. So especially as you're entering midlife, like I am, I'm in my 40s, you might experience all these things where there's brain fog, where everything feels really overwhelming, where you feel like the rage has now consumed your life, where all of a sudden there's weight gain or there's all these amplifications of these symptoms that we just put off as that this is hormones. And there is so much we can do to bring our body back into hormonal balance within reason of where we are in our lifespan, to be able to help some of those symptoms. So even if we're in the depths of perimenopause, we always want to start with cortisol. We always want to look at what's happening in our stress response in our body and the lifestyle tools that we have to be able to navigate, because we're not going to ever fully be out of a stress mode. Like stress is always going to be part of our life, especially in the modern day makeup. But our body also needs cortisol, right? Like it's unrealistic to believe that you don't want cortisol in your body, because cortisol is our awakening, our morning alarm clock, right? We have this natural rhythm between cortisol and melatonin that helps our body know when it's daytime and when it's sleep time. And so it's about knowing what the in range response is, and when cortisol is starting to take over the show, what can we do to help navigate that and help bring the body back into balance? Because it's not
Mhm.
always about resolving the cortisol. Sometimes it's about really working with that nervous system to change the response so that way the body knows that there's safety, right? That it's not just this alarm system all the time on. In our modern day society, when we're carrying on so many different tasks and the mental load and the emotional load, it's really easy for our nervous system to just be stuck on the on switch, where it's constantly thinking that it has to run from a tiger, when in fact it's just actually wanting to run from school pickups and grocery lists and whatever else that we've piled on.
Yes, absolutely. And so I'm excited to dig into this with you and find out some of these tips and tricks and like time wise, like, is this obviously, I don't think this is an overnight solution that's just poof, we're going to try this stuff and then be done with it. I think this is like lifestyle changes and will be somewhat not slow going, but a little bit.
Yeah. Well, here's the reality is that in our 20s and even our early 30s, we have way more stress resiliency than we do late 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. And a lot of that is because of hormonal makeup. So, one of the main factors there is going to be your progesterone and your DHEA. So, DHEA is a natural hormone, it's an androgen that is in our body, and it peaks between 26 and 30-ish. And this hormone is what creates that stress resiliency. So, when I learned this, it was a profound moment for me in thinking about. I got married when I was 30. I started having kids in my early 30s. And when we have this extra stress resiliency because we're naturally have this high level of DHEA in our body, which is creating that stress resiliency. You remember if you're in your 20s and you stayed up really late and you could bounce back and go to work at 7 a.m. and nothing ever felt like it was too much. That's
Yeah.
because of that, what we call our fountain of youth hormone. And so we say yes to a lot of things in our late 20s and our early 30s. We create these silent agreements in our relationships, in how we feel like we should show up in our careers, how we should show up for our family, how we should show up for as a community member. And we start doing all of these things because at the time it feels really good. And we don't understand that there's a biological component that's really driving this yes, ma'am inside of us, right? That's making us
Mhm.
want to do these things, which is okay. And our bounce back is quite easily. But then we hit 39, 40, 45, and all of a sudden we get resentful and we get tired and we get burnt out and we get overwhelmed and we're wondering why everything feels so much harder. And it's because there's this natural decline happening in this hormone already in our system. And we've now created all these agreements that everyone thought were okay for 10 plus years. And now we're like, wait a minute, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to have to give myself all the time. It doesn't feel good. I'm exhausted. I'm not sleeping well. And the reason why we're not sleeping well is because our cortisol is high and it's throwing off our circadian rhythm, which means that we're not getting enough melatonin production, which all these like crazy things start to happen behind the scenes. And so I think one of the most powerful tools we can do with women entering midlife, and when I say entering midlife, I'm talking mid to late 30s going into 40s. If you're thinking that it's perimenopausal symptoms, just for a moment reflect about, am I doing things that actually feel good in my life? Or do I need to update our agreements? Because every relationship has unspoken agreements. And the first thing that we can do is start to look at, are these really in service for me anymore? And if not, we need to have a talk around it. And it's okay to have those talks. Now, the people in our life might not like them, but they're important to have because we just don't have the capacity that we once had.
Yeah,
Right.
that's so true because I'm kind of now menopausal.
Mhm.
But I still found, even just kind of going through that perimenopause and the menopause and stuff, just yeah, being tired and just not like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I can't do the same things that I could do, 15 years ago. I don't have the capacity or the space for that. So,
Mhm.
right? We just don't understand that it's okay to take that step back and say, you know what? I just need a little bit of space for me to kind
Yeah.
of recoup.
Well, and a
Yeah.
lot of these sometimes isn't the things that we can see. Like it's carrying that mental load and that emotional load. And what that means is mental load is planning out the execution of tasks, right? Of preparing for what needs to happen. Emotional load is where we can predict everybody's emotional needs and know how to support them. And this comes into play a lot with sometimes with our work life, right? Sometimes it's with our parents. A lot of times it's with if we have children that we're already like anticipating their needs and how to support them. It can be even how we support our partners sometimes as well.
Yeah.
Where I found it was the most draining is the mental load. That is what I think crippled me, especially when I was in a high cortisol state for a long duration of time. So we're talking young kids in pandemic. My husband had a career change. My dad passed away, so we layered on grief of that. And then taking on trying to care for my mom and my dad's business and run my business. Like there was so much going on that I literally hit burnout. But then these mental tasks and these emotional tasks still had to be tended to.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tend to them anymore. And I couldn't find the resiliency that I once had. And so having those conversations, especially with my husband, of being like, I need to offload some of these tasks. And in his mind, he's like, but I am helping. And yes, he was helping, but he was only helping when I said, hey, I need you to do this. And that's not actually offloading my mental load at all. That's him just utilizing my brain for the easy street for himself. Right. And so, there's a great book called Fair Play. Her name is Eva Rodsky, I believe. It's beautiful in that she coaches you on how to have these conversations about like what is the agreement and when we look at the task, what is the expectation behind that task? And not just maybe your expectation, but have a conversation with your partner about cleaning the bathrooms. This is a great one. It's not just cleaning the toilet and the sink. It's actually making sure that the mirror's wiped down, that the toothpaste that's on the floor that someone tried to wipe up with toilet paper has actually been scrubbed off, to make sure that the towel that's hanging on the rack gets changed out because it's full of kids' toothpaste. Like these are all the things, right?
Yeah.
And so once this becomes an agreement of like, when you do this task, this is all the things that you have to cover. And I know it seems tedious to do this, but it frees up your mental load because now there's an agreement of like, when this task has to be done, you have to do this. And if you've agreed to take this task, it means you take the execution and you take the thought process behind it, right? And so I think it's so incredibly important.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think too, right? Because when we give those chores or tasks to people, we all perceive them different, right? So we all have a different thing of what does cleaning the bathroom look like you suggested, right? So I think what you're trying to say to everybody is the more honest you could be with your partner or children or whoever
Mhm.
you're doing it. So then you're not like, because I know that's the thing for me is I've asked for help and then you go in and you're just like, why didn't they, pick the toothpaste up, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
I should have just
well,
did it myself. Like it would have been way easier. Yes.
yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a thing, right? So just putting those expectations out for people and explaining this is what I need, exactly what I need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that will probably help, although I suspect that there will still be things that will have bumps with their emotions and everything else. So,
hmm
Yeah.
The other night, like real case study here, I had that exact moment washing the dishes. I asked my husband to wash the dishes and I came out and I was like, why are you doing it that way? And then I finally had to be like, there's 100 million different ways to do a task. You need just to back off because he's doing what you asked and it's getting done. It doesn't have to be your way, but I had to leave the room physically because I was like,
Yes.
I feel like I'm going to start nitpicking about how you're doing this task because it seems ridiculous on how you're doing it, but I just had to walk away.
yeah, I had to eventually say to myself, is this a me thing or is this a thing, right? Like, is this like everybody should be doing it this way or is this just drive me nuts? And I'm like, there's a lot that was like, oh, that's just a me thing. Leave exactly like you said, I'm just going to leave the room. I'll
Just
fix
leave
that
the room.
sofa to be the way it should be later when nobody's around.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a DHEA. So DHEA is really important for us to know that it's just a natural decline. It's going to happen. It declines faster if we're under chronic stress. So that's really important. Like if you need motivation, know that your DHA levels can drastically drop if you're not tending to your stress levels. And we need DHEA because it's also a sign of our adrenal health. It's made in our adrenals. And once we go through perimenopause and we're into postmenopause, our adrenals have to take over the production of our progesterone and some of our estrogen. So if we've already taxed out our adrenals so badly that it can't produce DHEA, then it's not going to be able to produce these other hormones either to really support us postmenopause.
Mhm.
So how do we start taking care of some of those things either before we get into perimenopause or as we're kind of figure this stuff out and it's like, oh, I better take care of this. How do we do that?
So it's a lot of nervous system tools. That's what's worked for me. What was the catalyst for me was seeing that I got very comfortable in operating in a stress mode all the time, right? So I would just do what I needed to. I push, 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 and then I would crash mid-afternoon And then I'd feel guilty about crashing. So then I would pick myself up and I'd work late into the night, and then I'd be wired but tired, or sorry, tired but wired. So I couldn't fall asleep. And then I created this vicious cycle. And so a lot of this is coming back to the foundations of how do we take care of ourselves. Now, some of the most easiest practical ways to start to address and deal with our cortisol load is first to have breakfast within an hour of waking. So our natural cortisol circadian rhythm, our spike that happens, is that it gradually begins from 4 a.m. to about 7 a.m. when we hit that peak. And that's our natural alarm clock saying time to rise and shine, right? We have this cortisol surge. What happens with so many women, especially busy, rushing women, is that we skip breakfast or we just have our coffee first and then we eat 3 hours later.
Yeah.
What happens is that our body, if we do either of those things, if we skip breakfast, we are signaling to the body that there is scarcity and that there is potential starvation. So we're already igniting this natural response in our body to fear starvation. So it's going to start to pull whatever resources it needs, including the cortisol, to be able to make sure that we have enough glucose to run, to fight, to whatever we want. So we're already naturally throwing on that alarm clock of like, or not the alarm clock, but the cortisol spike of going, hey, we need to be able to prepare to escape out of this really bad situation. So when we have that flood of glucose first thing in the morning, because we haven't ate within that 60 to 90 minutes, is that we're going to throw our blood sugar levels way off, which means that our body's going to throw out way more insulin. So women that are like, I'm gaining all this weight, I think it's due to stress. It's probably linked a big portion of it to not eating breakfast. So we want to eat breakfast so that way we signal to the body that there's safety, that we're being nourished, that we have food, that it doesn't have to worry about that issue at all. And then that also adds in the component, especially if we're starting to add in protein and fat into our breakfast, which is really important, is that it's going to balance those sugar levels that might have spiked a little bit if we are somebody who is in that really chronic stressed out or burnout state right now. So this is a gentle way that we can start to nourish the body. The reason why protein and fats are really important is because they help to stabilize our blood sugars and they set the tone for our body throughout the whole day to help with those glucose spikes that we might have. So if you're somebody who is really struggling with insulin or struggling with weight gain, as weird as it may sound, fat and protein first thing in the morning is really, really important and within that 90-minute window.
And
then
I
if you're
would, sorry, and
That's
then
okay.
that would be good fats then, like, right, your
Yes.
avocados and
Avocado butter. You can use butter as your fat. So like if you're cooking eggs, cooking your eggs with butter is a fat, and that is your fat substance. So it's not always just adding extras on top. It's not just having nuts in our yogurt. Sometimes it's just how we cook our food as well. And choosing
Right.
good fats. So
Mhm.
I know this is gonna be hard for some people, but not vegetable oils. You
Yeah.
want to have like your olive oils or your butter or your ghee if you're cooking. Those are going to be your best. But then other things that you can layer on is like your avocados. You can use nut butters if you wanted to. You can use nuts and seeds as if you wanted to. So there's ways that we can get those healthy fats through those other alternatives as well.
Thank you. I just, in case anybody's listening and wanting, and because some people, I know that, but doesn't mean that everybody knows
Mhm.
that.
Well, and here's my little protein hack because I have 3 kids that are all in elementary school still. I am 45. I have recovered from burnout, and my life is busy in the mornings because I wake up and it's right away out the gates. We've got to get breakfast on the table for the kids. And because I do the work that I do, I'm not going to let my kids eat cereal because I know that it's going to create an insulin rush that they're going to crash from in school. So I make them protein and so forth. So I have to make them breakfast and I have to make their lunches and I have to get them out to the bus by 8:06. So it's like, and I'm not somebody who likes getting up at like, there's those people that are like, I get up at 4:30, I get up at 5. That's not me. I get up at 7:15. So like when I say like it's a rush out of the gates, it's like I'm choosing my sleep and then I'm choosing to know that I have to get these things done. So realistically, my kids are out the door by 8:06, so I could start to make my breakfast, but even then I'm pushing that 90-minute window and I know it. So what
Yeah.
I do is I do a protein shake first thing in the morning because I can quickly make my protein shake. I can drink it while I'm doing everything. It's easy. For other people, a high protein yogurt, so not your sugary ones, like you're going to want to look on the containers to see. A lot of them will now say high protein, 19 grams of protein in one serving, those kind of things. You may want to just have that. Like, and I know, like, I think the one that I have, it's 1 cup is 19 grams. So that's a lot of yogurt to eat. At least for
Yeah.
me, it is. So, but just know, like, even if you have like half of that serving, you've got at least 10 grams of protein in your system to get you through that rush and then have the time to make your actual good breakfast or to eat the full spectrum of what you would want.
Mhm.
So protein breakfast is really important. And then for all us coffee drinkers, especially in midlife, we like our coffee because that's been our crutch to get us through the through the day. Um, Make sure you have your breakfast first because coffee increases our adrenaline. It's working on those adrenals. So if we have no food in our system, we're now stacking cortisol response with another cortisol stimulant, right? So we're just asking for a bigger crash to happen in our body.
That makes
Wow.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's like the easiest hack. The second one is getting sunlight in your retinas first thing in the morning. And the reason why this is because if we can get sunlight in our eyeballs, so not with sunglasses, like no sunglasses, go out. If you have eyeglasses that you wear and they have like I don't know what you call it, where they turn into sunglasses, that's also not going to be effective. So if you're one of those people, find a chair, take off your glasses, sit down, and let it hit your eyeballs for 5 to 15 minutes. The reason why this is really important is because it sets that circadian rhythm in our body, which is then going to help with our melatonin production later on. So essentially, us getting sunlight in our eyes first thing in the morning tells our body it is daytime. This is when we're supposed to create cortisol first thing. We're supposed to have this nice, beautiful peak. So that way, when it gets dark, our body knows, hey, wait a minute, now it's nighttime. We have to start like down regulating, preparing for bed. So they say that a lot of sleep issues that women have, it's because of the morning routine suffering. So our sleep happens first thing in the morning. So we want to tend to having that hit of light in our eyeballs to help our body create an appropriate arc in our cortisol levels. So that way it knows how to create the production in the evening.
Wow.
Yeah. So these are both free. This is the beautiful thing is that it's free and it doesn't seem overwhelming. Now, we live in Alberta, so getting sunlight in your eyes in winter is not like our favorite thing to do, at least not me. I don't like going out in the cold. So I do have a happy lamp. I just bought mine for Costco. I think it was $60. So like you don't need anything fancy, just like one of those happy lamps that will get that same response into your retinas. And so I just put mine on the kitchen counter when I'm making breakfasts. It's not that you have to look directly in it, you just have to have it in the vicinity so that it's hitting your face. And so I make my lunches with it on the counter and then we're good to go.
That's a good thing. And I think a lot of things, like the more I've been reading, it's like, you look at all these different things that happen in our life. And so that makes sense to me that, the morning would affect the evening because it's like, even with some diseases that we get or things that we suffer from, high blood pressure, heart stuff is all stuff that actually started happening when we were in our 20s and 30s from not taking care of ourselves properly. So this makes totally sense to me. And so I'm excited
Yes.
for all the
Sometimes the
hacks.
tools are the most simplest and basic. Another great tip, and I got this out of the Rushing Women's Syndrome book. What was her name? Actually, I have it right here. Her name is Dr. Libby Weaver. She wrote a great book on this, and it's all on like the nervous system and rushing women's syndrome. How we're always in a hurry and how it's impacting our health. But her go-to suggestion is even when you wake up in the morning, take 20 deep breaths because right away that's going to regulate your nervous system. And once again, you don't have to try to meditate. You don't have to like, it's just like, can I take 12 deep belly breaths so I can get that vagus nerve working so I can already set the tone for my day that I'm going into it with calm and ease versus that stimulation of I'm already behind the 8 ball. So that's another important tip.
And I would imagine somewhere in there is like getting rid of your phone when it's time for bed and getting that proper rest that we should be getting. Start winding down ahead of time and do some of that.
Yeah, so midlife, it can feel a little overwhelming. I know it's for me, it can feel really overwhelming to get enough sleep in because for some of us, we have young kids. And so we get them all to bed, and then we're like, I need my time to decompress, which is our excuse to then go on our phones or on TVs until 11 o'clock at night. And all that blue light stimulation does create an impact in our nervous system. And it impacts our melatonin production once again, right? Which is going to impact our cortisol. Because if we're not sleeping well, we're not also supporting that circadian rhythm. It all comes back to like the simplicity of it. So, they always say like 2 hours before bed, you should be off all your devices, off TV, any of that blue light. Now, I'm going to be honest, it's hard for me to do that. So it's hard for me to coach women and say you should do it. But what I do is in the evening is I put on blue blocking glasses. So I know that I'm going to watch TV. I just put on those in the evening. It should be red lenses, but if you only have the yellow ones, because a lot of people have them for the office, that's still better than nothing, right? So wear your blue blocking glasses if you're somebody who's like, no, I need an hour of decompression before I can go on. That's me, as I know that it's going to be 10 o'clock before I can turn off everything. So that's really important, is like, how do we block that blue light? Now, another one that we take for granted and we don't really realize is the overhead lights. So this is another simple hack that you can do to really support the melatonin production, is that when the sun starts to set, we want to create that same kind of environmental uh, feeling in our homes. And so if we can turn off the big overhead lights and use lamps that are at mid-level, that's going to be way better for our brain and our optic nerves to get the signaling that it is best to start to, or that we, not best, but that we want to start to wind down and want to start to create that melatonin spike versus the cortisol. And so if you can have lamps in your house, or else think about getting dimmers in your light switches, or just turning off as many lights as you possibly can so that you're creating more of that darkness overhead and keeping the light low.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I find it's funny because when you do it when there's kids around, especially, it's like, suppers hustle bustle, get cleaned up, blah, blah, blah. And then you start turning the lights down, they turn down too, right? Because
Yeah.
it's just like you said, it's that natural thing where our bodies are like, oh, it's getting darker. I should be getting tired. And yeah,
Yeah.
I love that one. And
Yeah. And if you're somebody who's really wired and you just can't sleep, my biggest thing is do not be working late, because the moment that we turn on our brain into that productivity of like, I'm going to work into the evening, which I know so many of us do, especially if you're shift workers, which you're going to have a whole different rhythm. But if you're teachers and you're grading at night, or like for me, sometimes my follicular phase, I'm like, I can do it all. And I stay up way too long on my computer, is that I stimulate my brain to stay awake. And so really like setting a hard cutoff time. For me, my cutoff time is like, I cannot under any circumstance work past 8 p.m. Because if I do, I'll be up all night. I know I will. My brain won't shut off. And then also knowing like, what are some nervous system tools that we can do to help ourselves unwind? It can be as simple as throwing your legs up the wall and doing legs up the wall for 10 minutes, right? Of just starting to create that regulation in the nervous system, that it can be calm, that it can begin to settle, and it's okay. For me, I like to read before bed just because, once again, mid-light lighting, having a book, I'm not having a screen in front of my face. Reading puts me to sleep sometimes, especially if it's a very like sciencey book. This is when I bring out my hormone books. It helps get me ease myself to sleep. So having routines like that, like even with my kids, there's no TVs on before bed. Instead, it's a half hour of reading before bed, right? Because it's another activity that starts to slow us down, right? The more that creates that sense of grounding is going to be really important. But there's so many nervous system tools out there, so find the one that really works for you to like regulate that nervous system and to prepare it for slowing down.
Right. So, what about if you get up in the middle of the night and you can't sleep? Because this is my thing, right?
Yep.
I can now fall asleep like a nobody's, because I do the same. I read and fall asleep, and then, you're up for 3 hours in the night, and it's like, ugh, now what? What do I do? Because you don't want to lay there and toss and turn, because that's annoying. So, I'd love to hear how
That
you
was my question too.
Yeah, this is a common one. So there's two types of insomnia that a lot of women in midlife have. One is that they're tired but wired, so they can't fall asleep. That's what I deal with. But then there's the other one where women wake up at 3 a.m., that 2 to 3 a.m. window, and then they can't fall back asleep for several hours. I just actually did a webinar last week on it. The replay is still available. So if anybody's listening to this and you're like, I need that replay, I can definitely send it out to you. But I also did a blog post as well on it. So that's on my website. It's pretty much the same information, just one's visual and one's reading, right? But the biggest thing with the 3 a.m. wake up calls is that it's usually a cortisol and it's usually an insulin issue. So the cortisol is that our circadian rhythm is out of whack, it's out of tune. So our cortisol is rising prematurely. It should start to begin its rise around 4 a.m., but it's a slow, gradual rise so that the peak is around that 7 to 8 a.m. But what happens for some of us is that if we are dysregulated, and we are under chronic stress, our body doesn't feel safe to sleep. We still have that adrenaline pulsating through us. So we might be able to fall asleep okay, but there's that background chatter, that background adrenaline that's still running, going, don't get too deep because something can jump out of the bushes and kill you, right? So we don't really allow, like our nervous system doesn't, it still kind of keeps us awake. And if you have some kind of sleep tracker, it might actually even show that you're really not getting into that deep sleep that we need, that you're always like that surface level sleep. And that would be a sign of that cortisol dysregulation where because it's not coming down properly, it's spiking too early. So it might be doing an early spike, which is then waking us up because now it's that alarm clock, right? And it's rather than doing it at 7 in the morning, it's now doing it at 3 in the morning. So we have to get that under control. The other aspect is also insulin. So if you have any kind of insulin issues or your body's been struggling with insulin, what's happening is that at that 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock time in the morning is that we are being woken up because we're in a glucose dip and our body's waking us up because it's saying like we need food, we need safety. And so if that's your case, if you're somebody who struggles with insulin, trying to have a snack before bed, especially if you're in your luteal phase, I find that this can be really helpful for luteal phases, and I'll get into that in a minute, sorry. But if it's an insulin issue, we want to have a snack, but we want to have a snack that's not carb heavy. So not like your crackers or a bowl of cereal or some chips or some popcorn, those things that are going to give you a high glucose spike because it's going to crash and it's going to crash at that 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, which is going to wake us up. So instead we want to have a snack that's actually going to stabilize those sugar levels while we sleep. So we're looking at, you can maybe have a toast with peanut butter. Some people have apple with seed butter, right? And so think about how can I incorporate a protein or a fat? The fat is the most important because that's going to keep the blood sugar stable, but more protein, more fat as a snack versus those simple carbohydrates that are going to create that spike in our glucose and then are going to crash us. So that's really important. And if you're somebody who struggles to fall asleep, and you find yourself you're still laying there at 3 o'clock in the morning, same suggestion. Go downstairs, get a snack that has some fat in it because it might be also an insulin issue. I find that when I have my insomnia nights where I just can't fall asleep, and by 2 o'clock, I'm like, come on, please. I'll go down to the kitchen. And as soon as I eat something, I'm out within 5 minutes. So like sometimes we really need that support. And so the reason why I say in the luteal phase it's really important is because so many of us cut calories in our luteal phase because I think it's a little bit of training and a little bit of like shame around that we're craving the sugar, we're craving the simple carbs, we're wanting to eat more. So it's like, oh my God, why am I so hungry? Like my body, like I've got to restrict it. And when we're in our luteal phase, what a lot of women don't realize is that we actually need more calories during the second half of our cycle. So our luteal phase is from ovulation to our period. And our body has a higher body temperature at this time, which means that we are burning more calories. Like our respiration rate is higher. Everything in our system is burning through more. And so we need more food. So if you feel like you're hungry and you're like, why am I eating so much more than what I did a week ago? It's because you're in a different phase of your cycle. And it's okay because you also are burning calories a lot quicker. And so what I find is a lot of people who aren't aware of this, we tell ourselves, no, I can't eat that. Or, oh my God, I'm craving sugar again. Like I've just got to restrict. We're craving that sugar is actually our body just needing more calories. So how can we put in good calories versus chips, chocolate bars, ice cream, all those things that are going to create that spike that means that we can't fall asleep again.
And so
Yeah.
does any of that correlate to the hot flashes and our bodies warming up? Does that have to do with the insulin and stuff as well?
That is more with estrogen.
Okay.
Yeah. The hot flashes that we have, especially in perimenopause and menopause, is more of that erratic fluctuation that we're having in our estrogen, which is going to be natural. It's not something that you can battle out of. It's just a natural thing. What I think I've read in a few places is that when we have these estrogen spikes and crashes that happen in perimenopause, at least the first phase of perimenopause, is that it can increase our histamine production. It can increase our mast cell activation. And so it's that increased histamine that often creates that heat. That's our
Okay.
night's flashes. And histamine is not a bad thing. That's once again, people hear the word histamine and they're like, allergic reaction, I need an EpiPen. That's not like our body has to have histamine in it for so many operations in our body. So we naturally always have a little bit of histamine running in the system. Where it becomes something that's not good is that when it's just kind of running havoc and it's doing its own thing and there's no purpose to it. It's that mast cell activation that it requires us to dig a little bit deeper. And once again, we can look into like how we can start to support that histamine, that increase in histamine in the body. But yeah, the hot flashes that happen, that's more of an estrogen thing. But once again, we can blame estrogen for it, but cortisol plays its role in it because estrogen, it needs progesterone to balance it out, right? Which is why in a woman's cycle, first 2 weeks of our cycle, we have an estrogen surge. And then the second half of our cycle, we have a progesterone surge. The two keep each other in check, right? We can't operate just in an estrogenic state because it's not good for our body. It really isn't. It's a building hormone, right? And so we want to have that progesterone. But now what happens in perimenopause or entering into that midlife cycle, even if you're not in perimenopause, is if we are under chronic stress, we're probably having suboptimal ovulations, which means that our progesterone that we create in that second half all come from ovulation. It comes from the shell of the egg. So even if you're like, I never want to get pregnant, that doesn't matter. We need that egg to be released because we need that shell to create that progesterone in our body. Progesterone is going to, like I said, help to balance out that estrogen. Progesterone is also a nervous system hormone. It's like a befriending hormone to our nervous system. So when we're dealing with that raging PMS and so forth, it might be because we don't have enough progesterone in our system, probably because we either didn't ovulate or we have suboptimal ovulations, meaning that we don't have a great egg. So the shell isn't giving us enough of that resource that we need.
Mhm.
And then this, once again, can happen because of cortisol. Because if we're stressed out, our body doesn't want us to get pregnant because then the infant or our pregnancy might not be safe. So it tries, our nervous system's so intelligent in that it's like, I'm going to protect the body because you can't get pregnant. So we're not going to let you have a good ovulation or release an egg, which then means that we have no progesterone, which means our estrogen goes higher and it creates havoc and it plays into this bigger problem. Now, the other really crazy thing about progesterone and cortisol is like, let's say we have a great ovulation and we have the ability to produce all this progesterone that we need. Cortisol is kind of like a little bit of a bully to progesterone in the fact that every cell in our body, I shouldn't say every, majority of the cells in our body have estrogen and progesterone receptors on them. In order for those hormones to get into the cell, it's kind of like they have a little key opening. So estrogen has its own special little shape to get into its key holding, its receptor, and same with progesterone. Progesterone and cortisols are very similar. So if we're being flooded with cortisol, cortisol can actually plug up our progesterone receptors on our cells, which means that when we do have this flood of progesterone in our system, it's like, yay, our body's like, we have all of it. And then it goes to go to the cells to do the job that it's supposed to do to help us keep calm. And it can't get in because cortisol is blocking it. So then the
Mhm.
progesterone just runs freely in our body, continuing to try to find any cell that might be available. And then if it's not utilized, it just gets reabsorbed back into the body and out through the system. And so this is where we can have an ovulation. Our hormone tests can show that we have progesterone in our body, like our progesterone levels look good, but yet we feel so crappy. It could be because we're under a chronic amount of stress and that cortisol is blocking those receptors. So even though we have progesterone, it's not doing anything.
Right.
And so it's another
Mhm.
reason why we have to try to get that cortisol under control because we want the goodness from the progesterone.
That makes
Well,
total sense to me.
Mhm.
a
So,
lot of
what
information.
it is a lot of information. Do you have a couple of people watching? So if anybody has questions, now's your time to ask Kate. She knows the stuff. So what about movement? Would this help with cortisol, like helping our cortisol levels and our insulin levels and
Yes and no. So all movement is good. This is the problem that we have in modern day society is that we sit in chairs, in vehicles, on couches. We don't move our body enough and we don't articulate our pelvis enough to create increased circulation. And so we really need to have that circulation in our pelvis. So if something brings you joy in movement, or at least semi joy, then it's great for our system. When we're pushing to do something and we're hating every minute of it, and we're pushing our body so hard that it's actually maybe potentially creating more cortisol in cases where we're under chronic stress. If I'm talking to somebody who's in their mid 20s and they're like life's easy peasy, then I'd be like, yeah, go run your 5K, you're fine. Right? But for a woman in perimenopause who's under chronic stress and feeling all the overwhelm and then is told by their doctor, you need to get more cardio in, so then they think it's a good idea to run on their treadmill for 45 minutes, but they hate every minute of it. They might be adding to their cortisol load versus helping their cortisol load. So a
Mhm.
lot of times when you're talking to a lot of people who are working in the yoga or fitness industry when it comes to perimenopause and menopause is we first look at the nervous system. Like, where are you at with your cortisol? Where are you at with your daily stress levels? And then it might be that we need to start small. We might need to do things that get you moving, that are gentle, that bring you joy. Those are more important than a 5K race. The exception with that is going to be weight training. Weight training is something that we really, as much as we may hate it, even trying to get 10 minutes in a few times a week is really important once we hit perimenopause and menopause because we begin to lose our muscle mass quite quickly. And our muscle tone helps to also support that insulin regulation in our body. So, this is where we can start to have insulin issues, prediabetes, all those kind of things. We want to keep up that muscle tone, not only to protect our bone health, but also to protect that insulin resistance that so many of us end up facing in midlife. So, weight training is in your 20s and early 30s, like cardio may be your jam, but when it gets to midlife, we want to focus more so on the weight training and more on the yin movements, I would call them. Going for a walk versus a run, going for a yoga class. Maybe it's a yin or restorative yoga class and not a vinyasa flow class. Like this is where you have to start listening to your body of like, does it bring me joy? Now, and when I say bring me joy, I have so many friends in midlife that have been runners, have always been runners. They love running, they're not going to give it up, right? And that's fine as long as they're not in a stressed out state, right?
Mhm.
So if it's actually helping their stress, then that's a great thing. But if they're so stressed out all day and they're like, I'm going to go for a run because it's going to decompress my nervous system, it may actually be adding to the load and not decompressing. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't run, right? Like there are people out there that, are built and born to be runners, as long as it's not making your symptoms worse, as long as you're
Right.
finding other ways to bring that nervous system back into regulation, then do what feels best for your body. But know that strength training is your primary focus. And then nervous system, yin style movements are going to be important. And then cardio is still important because of our cardiovascular health, but we can do that in so many different ways. We can do that through running, we can do that through biking, we can do that through rowing, we can do that through walking, we can do that through swimming, right? There's a lot of ways that we can incorporate that. I have a walking pad by my desk, and I obviously don't do it when I'm typing. But if I have to go on a webinar where I'm watching someone else present, I'm like, I don't have to sit here for this. I can actually do a little bit of movement, right? So these are the ways that we can start to incorporate it a little bit into our day. So that way we are getting that movement in.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think that's important because that was a conversation we had at work, and a couple of girls are actually getting standing desks so
Mhm.
that they can actually stand up a little bit. Because I said, it's really sad because we come to work, so we drive to work, go to our desk, sit in our desk, get up, go for coffee, where we then sit again. So it's just like you're getting up and there is some, but there's not enough movement. And so, some of the people were saying, "Oh, I have a walking pad under my desk. So when I'm doing the stand-up stuff, if I'm not doing something that, you know, like you said, watching a video or in a
Right.
meeting or something where you can kind of do it, like that's a good thing to get that movement in because yeah,
Mhm.
we have become such a sedentary kind of society.
hmm
Yeah.
And it's really important for women to know in midlife, your body shape is going to change. It's inevitable. I believe that they say, it was in a book that I was reading that's called Second Spring. And I think she said there that it was between 15 and 20 pounds on average, people are going to be in midlife, right? And this isn't a fault of your own. It's actually a biological response. Our body is shifting, changing. How our estrogen is made is going to have to change. It's going to be made, postmenopause is going to be made through some of our fat tissue. So there's a reason why women's bodies change, right? So I think sometimes when we're stuck in this dialogue of, I have to be the same weight I was when I was 20, that's just unrealistic, right? And it's not healthy, right? It's not even that's unrealistic, it's just not healthy, right? And so I think I would hope that this new movement that's coming in, especially as we talk more and more about perimenopause and menopause, is also allowing our body to change and to find joy and pleasure in that our body doesn't look the same. And that's
Yeah.
okay,
And
right?
It is. And what about connection through all of this? And like, because I think it's so great because I don't, like when my mom was growing up, there wasn't talk about menopause and perimenopause
no,
or
not
any
at
of
all.
that stuff. And even for myself, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about it. So I feel like the education is really important with this and finding out the right answers, not necessarily, Google's great and the internet's great, but there's a lot of false things out there. And so then I guess that comes back to my other thing with connection and just, you know, being in girls groups or just connecting with other people. Is that important for this as well?
This is such a fascinating um, piece of information here is women's nervous systems and male nervous systems regulate off of different hormones. So a male hormonal system actually finds regulation through dopamine hits. Dopamine hits come through running, through shopping, through searching on your phone. Those are quick, those aren't healthy dopamine hits, but you get the picture, right? It's like I do something, I get a reward, right? And so men's hormonal system, that's a hormone that's needed to help for regulation. Women, it's oxytocin. And we assume oxytocin as sex, breastfeeding, childbirth. Like we think of all these things. But oxytocin is also released through being in community. And so, in order for our nervous system to regulate, we have to know we have community. We have to be in community. And I think this is one of the greatest things that we have lost as our society has become industrialized is back in the day, women didn't raise kids on their own. Back in the day, even like 20, like I think of my mom. My mom had her mom to lean on for childcare all the time. Like we were, I'm gonna say pawned off on my grandma all the time because we were just dropped there and been like, you're gonna take care of them. We're leaving for the weekend, right? Like it was just a thing. Like I totally felt comfortable being at my grandmother's houses. And my mom, I don't think her nervous system ever was in an anxious state of being like, are they gonna be safe? But
Right.
over the last few decades, what's happened is it has fallen solely on independent parenting of women focusing on their careers, of us not getting back out into those communities, for us having a hard time making friends in midlife because all our energy has changed. We're exhausted in the evening. We don't want to go out in the cold to drive somewhere. Like we come up with all these excuses, and they're valid excuses, right? Our energy, everything shifts, our hormones shift, but then also remembering that there is something very healing for the female nervous system to be in community, however that might be. So if you're in a building where you're working, don't just run and go get your coffee and come back to your desk. Socialize, build that community, go visit someone in their office, right? Disrupt your day with these hits of oxytocin because it's so regulating for the nervous system.
Well,
Very nice.
yeah, that's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing you saying is if we eat somewhat more healthy, getting the proper fats and the proteins that we need, snacking before bed if we're finding that we're not sleeping well, getting outside, getting the sunlight in our eyes, trying to get off the screens before bedtime, getting out into community, getting some yin movement and doing things that bring us joy. So you want to run, like you said, run. If you want to do some of these other things, then do that with the strength training, that it will not necessarily take away all the symptoms of menopause and perimenopause, but will certainly help ease it a little bit.
It will have a huge impact. I cannot promise you'll take it away because this is a natural transition, but it will create such ease in your body. A lot of symptoms, even when I'm working one-on-one with clients and they come to me with their long list, honestly, when you start working on one, because you're dealing with either that cortisol or that insulin response, all of a sudden it's like everything just kind of clicks back into place. It's kind of like those little Legos, like everything just clicks back into place and symptoms are reduced hugely. Your sleep changes. All of a sudden your weight starts to shift. All of a sudden you have mental clarity. You're not snapping at your kids as much or your partner as much. You're not wanting to burn your life down after your ovulation. Like there's all these things that begin to shift. And sometimes it can feel so subtle that you don't recognize it. But then there's going to be this moment where you wake up and you're like, oh my God, that felt different. I just had one of those moments actually last week when I was in my early luteal phase. And this is how I know that what I've been putting into practice has helped my nervous system and really has brought me out of burnout at the age of 45 is my husband was having a moment last week at supper time where he was just grouchy and edgy. And it didn't matter what I said, he was just gonna like pick a fight. And normally in my luteal phase, because you're more sensitive here, I would have been like taking it all personally. I would have been ready for the fight. The rage would have come out. For some people, it would be the tears. But it was really amazing that I could see him having big emotions and spiraling. And I was so still. I was just like, I can hold space for this. I'm not feeling triggered by it. I'm not feeling like this is me issues. Like it was so, and it's funny because I have an aura ring and I track my hormones. So I was able to see like my progesterone was doing this beautiful peak that I haven't had in a while. It's been kind of like a tooth, a shark tooth mouth, right, for a while. And it had this beautiful peak. And I was able to hold this container. And I was like, this is what it feels like when progesterone's actually tending to your nervous system and cortisol's not running the show, right? And so it was this moment. But if I wasn't watching for it, I probably wouldn't have noticed it. I would have been like, okay, that happened. But instead, I was like, I feel calmer than I've ever felt. Like, this is how I actually am able to ground myself when I'm dealing with my kids with the temper tantrum. And I'm able to do this in my luteal phase with a husband who's had a really crappy day and is wanting to blame someone for it. So, I was able to hold space for that, knowing like, I'll have my moment, but today is his and it's okay. He's having big feelings.
Yeah,
But
that's
it's these little
awesome.
things, right? Like just start to notice like, am I sleeping better? Did I get more sleep? Did I wake up less? Am I feeling a little less cranky? Am I feeling a little bit more excited? Those are the things to start to watch for.
It's
Yeah.
interesting because even after you mature past where you guys are, you still need all these things in
Hmm.
order to maintain some kind of balance. Otherwise, you can be like this too, right?
Yeah.
Almost like when I've had my period now or what?
Yeah. Well, and because you're a cyclical creature, right?
Yeah,
You have had a cycle at some point in your life and you had it for decades. That is
Right.
a memory that's in your tissue. And I truly believe this. I don't know if any scientist has ever proven it, but I truly believe, and I've heard this from other like women shamans, is that we are cyclical. So if we've had decades of this imprinting into our nervous system of what it feels like to be four different women with four different sets of needs, with four different emotional reactions, then it's natural post-menopause for us to have the same rhythm. It's different in that it's not necessarily brought on by these big noticeable hormone shifts, but it's
right,
brought in by moon cycles. You might notice it with the moon that all of a
right,
sudden there's different parts where you're like, wait a minute, I'm feeling a little edgy. And it might be that time between the full moon and the new moon, right? So it's really
yeah.
interesting to track that to see, is it because of that? Because we are governed by the moon cycles.
Oh, yeah,
And, looking at the environmental seasons, this is for anyone, even if you are menstruating or you're not menstruating, our winter, like right now, we are just like, if we were to relate it to the moon cycle, we're about to come into well, almost the
mhm,
midpoint of the full, like the waxing moon, right? So
yeah,
coming into that halfway point before the full moon. In our cycle, this would be the same as the follicular phase, right? Or close to the follicular phase. We're not quite there yet. So in January, after this is what I don't get is December and January are like crazy. Well, December's crazy. In January, we're burned out from December. And this is our winter months where we're actually supposed to like hibernate, do nothing. And yet it's this is when we hustle the most. We make sure
it
everybody
is.
has a present. We make sure the house is decorated. We make sure that the Christmas cards got into the mailbox. We make sure that we check the mailbox. We make sure that we made the travel plans. We make sure that we bought all the groceries. We like our list is insane. And this is the
Yeah,
time of season when environmentally it's darker. Everything is telling us do less, and yet we hustle more here than we ever do throughout the year. And then
right.
January comes and we feel like a bag of crap. And we wonder why we have no
Sure.
motivation. And then we buy these programs in January because we're like, we feel so horrible. Maybe this will make me feel better. But then we don't open the program. I'm guilty of this. So, this is one reason why like we have to ask ourselves, like, can I actually just be okay with being less until March 21st? March 21st is our follicular phase. It's the beginning of spring. It is that halfway point moving from that full moon or that new moon into the full moon, right? Like this is when we start to get that rush of energy. Can I just like have little less expectations on myself to do things and be okay with it?
Yes,
And that can be really hard for women. So like starting to look at like how we are cycles within cycles. We have our menstrual cycle, that's one governing body. We have the moon cycle, which is another governing body. We have the circadian rhythm, which is another governing body. Then we have our environmental seasonal cycle, that's a governing body. And then we have our life cycle, which is another governing body, right? And they all interplay with each other. And when we start to tap into that, we can see why, like, oh, you know what? I know why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling today.
I think that's amazing. Wow, you gave everybody so much information. So
kidding.
if you're watching the replay and you have questions for Kate, let us know and we'll make sure that she gets them so she can answer them for you. And can you tell us, Kate, where people can go in to find you if they want to do some of your programs and maybe tell us a little bit about if you have any programs or what you have going?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Hormones with Kate. And then you can find me on my website at sherevival.com. And she has two E's in it. It stands for Sacred Healing through Embodiment and Empowerment. And in there, there's a resource tab. I hold monthly free webinars. Not sales pitches. They're just me coming on, giving a piece of hormone information, one more thing that you can add to your little tool belt. So those are always open for people to come and join each month. There's a few other resources in there as well. And then the programs, I do one-on-one coaching with women in what I call the Hormone Reset program, where we go through my hormone rest system. I particularly work with a lot of women that are entering that midlife, that are feeling the overwhelm, the exhaustion, the burnout or questioning if they have burnout. Maybe it's the raging PMS, maybe it's the roller coasters of hormones for perimenopause. And so I really help you balance your hormones, as well as looking at how we can incorporate more nervous system tools to really support the body in whatever transition it needs. And then I do have a program called Cyclical, which I'm going to be launching. It's going to start March 1st is when the doors open to register. So if you're really interested in this idea of cycles upon cycles, Cyclical Reclaiming You is a 9-month journey where we look at all of this. We look about how can we reclaim our identity and how can we use our cycle wisdom to get us there. Because when we enter midlife, a lot of women are feeling very lost in who they are. It's like, I'm a mom, I'm a marketing specialist, I am John's wife, I am like, but we don't know what actually brings us pleasure. And that was me. I remember there was this moment where I sat in my doctor's office going, I don't know what brings me joy anymore, because I've been funneling all of my energy and my resources to all these other people. I don't know what makes me happy. And so this is where we can start to use our cyclical wisdom and understanding how the patriarchy's kind of playing into it, what the nervous system has to do with it, how we can advocate for our health, and then all these fun tools that revolve around self-care, nutrition, womb healing, all those kinds of different things. So,
And if they want to sign up for that, that's on your website.
yeah, it's on my website. It's called Cyclical Reclaiming You, and doors open March 1st. You can also just get on my newsletter as well, and it'll be announced there first for you as well.
Perfect. And your podcast
Oh yeah, and my podcast. What the hormones? Because like today's conversation, so many of us in this stage of life are like, what is going on with my hormones? And so this is a podcast where we look at all those big questions. What is going on? Why do I feel this way? And what can I do about it? So
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on with us today. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and so much information. So hopefully this will help somebody that's listening and be like, oh, there is ways to help me through this.
Yeah,
So
they need the information is needed out there for women, so they have a better understanding of it. So yes, it was great to see you.
yeah, it was so great being on again. And hopefully I didn't fire hose everyone with all this information. Remember, you may have to pause and go back, but it's just the baby steps. Do one thing. Do one thing that makes you feel better. And that's all you have to do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on with us. We really, really appreciate it. And
Anytime.
all right, that sounds perfect. And everybody else, we will see you on the next podcast and the next